Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Rainam Namaskritya Nam Chava Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tojayamadurya Stapreshu Bhadreshu Bhagavatav Sevaya Bhagavatyutama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistaki. My favorite verse is irrevocable. Okay, so reading from Canto 3, Chapter 28, text 1 through 19. Kapila's instructions on the execution of devotional service. And then last text will. Sri Bhagavanavacha, the personality of Godhead said, my dear mother, O daughter of the king, now I shall explain to you the system of yoga, object of which is to concentrate the mind. By practicing this system, one can become joyful and progressively advance towards the path of the absolute truth.
One should execute his prescribed duties to the best of his ability and avoid performing duties not allotted to him. One should be satisfied with as much gain as he achieves by the grace of the Lord, and one should worship the lotus feet of his spiritual master.
Forming conventional religious practices and should be attracted to those which lead to salvation. One should eat very frugally and should always remain secluded so he can achieve the highest perfection of life.
One should practice nonviolence and truthfulness. One should avoid thieving and be satisfied with possessing as much as he needs for maintenance. he should abstain from sex life, perform austerity, be clean, study the Vedas, and worship the supreme form of the personality of Godhead.
One must observe silence, acquire steadiness by practicing different yogic postures, control the breathing of the vital air, withdraw the senses from sense objects, and thus concentrate the mind on the heart.
Fixing the vital air and the mind in one of the 6 circles of vital air circulation within the body, thus concentrating one's mind on the transcendental pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is called samadhi, or samadhana of the mind.
By these processes, or any other true process, one must control the contaminated, unbridled mind, which is always attached by material enjoyment, and thus fix himself thought of the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
After controlling one's mind and sitting postures, one should spread a seat in a secluded and sanctified place. Sit there in an easy posture, keeping the body erect, and practice breath control.
The yogi should clear the passage of vital air by breathing in the following manner. First, he should inhale very deeply, then hold the breath in, and finally exhale, or reversing the process. The yogi can first exhale, then hold the breath outside, and finally inhale. This is done so that the mind may become steady and free from external disturbances.
The yogis who practice such breathing exercises are very soon freed from all mental disturbances, just as gold, when put into fire and fanned with air, becomes free from all impurities.
By practicing the process of pranayama, one can eradicate the contamination of the psychological condition, and by concentrating the mind, one can become free from all sinful activities. By restraining the senses, one can free himself from material association, and by meditating on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one can become free from the 3 modes of material attachment.
When the mind is perfectly purified by this practice of yoga, one should concentrate on the tip of the nose with half-closed eyes and see the form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
The Supreme Personality of Godhead has a cheerful, lotus-like countenance, with ruddy eyes like the interior of a lotus, and a swarthy body like the petals of a. He bears a conch, discus, and mace in 3 of his hands.
His loins are covered by shining cloth, yellowish like a filaments of a lotus. On his breast he bears the mark of Shivatsa, a curl of white hair. The brilliant Kaustubha gem is suspended from his neck.
Around his neck, a garland of attractive sylvan flowers, and a swarm of bees, intoxicated by its delicious fragrance, hums about the garland. He is further superbly adorned with a pearl necklace, a crown, and pairs of armlets, bracelets, and anklets.
His loins and hips encircled by a girdle, he stands on the lotus of the devotee's heart, his devotee's heart. He is most charming to look at, and his sincere aspect gladdens the eyes and souls of the devotees who behold him.
The Lord is eternally very beautiful, and he is worshipable by all the inhabitants of every planet. He is ever youthful and is always eager to bestow his blessing on his devotees.
The glory of the Lord is always worth singing, for his glories enhance the glories of his devotees. One should therefore meditate upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead and upon his devotees. One should meditate on the internal form of the Lord until the mind becomes fixed.
Thus, always merged in devotional service, the yogi visualizes the Lord standing, moving, lying down, or sitting within him.
for the pastimes of the Supreme Lord are always beautiful and attractive.
Okay, so we'll focus on this first text too. Stitam rajantam ashinam. Stitam rajantam ashinam. Sayanam vaguhashayam. Sayanam vaguhashayam. Prekshaniye hitam yad yach. Prekshaniye hitam yayach. Shudha bhavena chetasa. Shudha bhavena chetasa. Stitam rajantam asinam. Shayanam vaguhashayam. Prekshaniye hitam yayach. Shudha bhavena chetasa. You would like to chant? Stitam rajantam asina. Sayanam vaguhashayam. Prekshaniye hitam yayach. Shudha bhavena chetasa. So we'll do the word for it together. Stita, standing. Rajantam, moving. Asinam, sitting. Shayanam, lying down. Va, or Guha Ashayam, the Lord dwelling in the heart. Prekshaniya, beautiful. Ihitham, pastimes. Jayet, he should be visualized. Sudabhavena, pure. Chetasa, by the mind. Thus, always merged in devotional service, the yogi visualizes the Lord, standing, moving, lying down, or sitting within him. For the pastimes of the Supreme Lord are always beautiful and attractive. Purport. The process of meditating on the form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead within oneself, and the process of chanting the glories and pastimes of the Lord are the same. The only difference is that hearing and fixing the mind on the pastimes of the Lord is easier than visualizing the form of the Lord within one's heart. Because as soon as one begins to think of the Lord, especially in this age, the mind becomes disturbed. And due to so much agitation, the process of seeing the Lord within the mind is interrupted. When there is sound vibrated praising the transcendental pastimes of the Lord, however, one is forced to hear. That hearing process clears the mind, and the practice of yoga is automatically performed. For example, even a child can hear and derive the benefit of meditating on the pastimes of the Lord, simply by listening to a reading from the Bhagavatam that describes the Lord as he is going to the pasturing ground with his cows and friends. Hearing includes applying the mind. In this age of Kali Yuga, Lord Chaitanya has recommended that one should always engage in chanting and hearing Bhagavad Gita. The Lord also says that the Mahatmas, or great souls, always engage in the process of chanting the glories of the Lord. And just by hearing, others derive the same benefit. Yoga necessitates meditation on the transcendental pastimes of the Lord, whether he is standing, moving, lying down, etc. So this section is 18, 19 verses. They're describing this astanga yoga. I mentioned, I think it was in the very first verse, just the second one. They were listed. It was in the purport. So astanga. Astanga ashtas, 8 young anga is limbs, so 8 limbs of yoga. And it lists them out. Yama, 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 niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, jnana, samadhi. And it goes through the different descriptions as we just read, controlling the senses, following rules and regulations, postures, asana. That's commonly when we hear yoga, you see the signs in the yoga studio. That's usually hatha yoga or asanas. Pranayama, breathing exercises. Pratyahara, withdrawing the senses. Jnana and dharana are similar, it's just different degrees, the last three of meditation, concentration, and ultimately samadhi, absorption. So sometimes we come across these and we think as bhakti yogas, we don't proclaim or we don't practice these things deeply. We talk about, as we just read, just descriptions and pastimes of the Lord. And so the thinking is that, well, maybe we would be better if we focused a little bit harder, it would help us. But I came across a very interesting comment that Srila Prabhupada made. Srila Prabhupada is really expert at just cutting through all the illusion, getting right to the core of the matter. A few words. So listen to this. This is from Bhagavad Gita 259. The verse says, though the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, because that's basically astanga yogas, restrict the senses, like a tortoise, right? You pull them in, and instead of putting energy out through the senses, you take it in. So, although the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense object remains. But ceasing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste is fixed in consciousness. So this idea of, this is astanga yoga, is basically controlling the senses, pulling them in. And the sitting postures help to do that. The breathing process help to do that. It controls the mind and it controls the body. And then you put your attention within. So it's a very powerful process, but in Kali Yuga it's very difficult. So this purport, I don't want to read the whole thing. It's a little longer, but which is the best part to read. I'll just read it. It's not too long. Unless one is transcendently situated, it is not possible to cease from sense enjoyment. Process of restriction from sense enjoyment by rules and regulations is something like restricting a diseased person from certain types of eatables. The patient, however, neither likes restrictions nor loses his taste for eatables. Similarly, sense restriction by some spiritual process, like astanga yoga, in the matter of yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, jnana, etc., is recommended for less intelligent persons who have no better knowledge. But one who has tasted the beauty of the Supreme Lord Krishna in the course of his advancement in Krishna consciousness no longer has a taste for dead material things. Therefore, restrictions are there for the less intelligent neophytes in the spiritual advancement of life. But such restrictions are only good until one actually has a taste for Krishna consciousness. When one is actually Krishna conscious, he automatically loses his taste for pale things. So I found that to be pretty profound, that these processes, which are very powerful processes, he's saying really they're kind of not a waste of time, but they're meant for people with a poor fund of knowledge. Srila Prabhupada used that phrase a lot, poor fund of knowledge. We want to have a good fund of knowledge. We want to have a lot of knowledge. We don't want to have a poor fund of knowledge. So if you don't have proper knowledge and you think these things are good, and they have their place to restrain us, but ultimately you can only constrain the senses for so long, and then they're going to break out and do something. But when you have a higher taste, it's easy. It's like, no, thank you. I'm not interested in those things. You have something better. And so that's what's being described in this section. It goes through the process of astanga yoga, mentioning controlling the mind, controlling the senses, breathing, etc. But ultimately, the point of that control is to think of the Lord, to meditate upon the Lord. And it's very easy when you understand that God is a person. It can be a little bewildering because he's not a person like us. We're a person, we're here in Alachua, which means we're not in San Francisco, we're not in New York, we're not in India, we're here in Florida. But the person, Krishna, he can be here in Gainesville. He's also in India. He's also in the temple in San Diego. He can be many, many places, and he is in many places at the same time. So his personhood or personality is different from our personality. We're limited. But he's a person nonetheless. Does this mean he's got thoughts and feelings and desires? He has a personality, he has a nature. And so when we think of that personality and visualize and understand that, it becomes easy to control the mind. One of the pastimes I'm very fond of is the lifting of Govardhan Hill. There's a 7-year-old boy, he lifts it not with his right hand, but with his left hand. Not with his hand, just with his pinky. He likes to be a little dramatic sometimes. Show you he can do things that other people can't do. And the pastime is attractive to me because Krishna has a lot of different relationships. I mean, this is a deep subject. He has a unique relationship with each and every one of us. Different from, you have a relationship with Krishna no one else has. That's why he created you. So he's got all these different relationships, and normally during the daytime, he plays with his cowherd boyfriends, and the nighttime, he'll play with his girlfriends. In the morning, his mother feeds him. So he has different relationships with different persons. But when he's lifting Govardhan Hill, all those persons are present at the same time. So he's showing off to his girlfriends, and then his brother, Lord Balaram, sees that he's flirting with them, and so then Krishna gets nervous, he's going to get in trouble, and his parents are there, so he's trying to behave properly, and his friends are there, they're going to help him lift the hill. So it's all these different types of moods going on all at the same time for a week. So you have all these different emotions and interactions. So when you start thinking of that and you hear about that, the mind becomes absorbed pretty easily, and you can think, oh, this is really interesting. And then some time goes on, you realize you haven't thought of anything else. So controlling the mind happens very naturally. So the more we read about and hear about Krishna's personality and his activities, then the mind naturally becomes attracted and the senses become controlled secondarily without extra effort. And so this is the process of yoga. This is what Srila Prabhupada is talking about, that these other processes are a little bit external, or they're meant for people who don't have the full knowledge to restrict their senses, but it's not as effective. It takes a lot of effort. But when we engage it in positive thought, honoring prasad, thinking of Krishna, engaging in festivals, doing activities that remind us of Krishna, we have paintings that remind us of Krishna's pastime, then the mind very easily becomes focused on something that's spiritual, and the senses become controlled. And then as we do that more and more, it becomes deeper and deeper that we gravitate towards that, and that gives us pleasure. And other things lose their pleasure. The senses just don't hold much attraction because they don't give the same pleasure. There's nothing wrong with seeking pleasure. In fact, you cannot restrain yourself from seeking pleasure because the nature of the soul, we're pleasure-seeking entities. That's in our DNA. We're looking for pleasure. That's part of what makes us us, is we want to experience pleasure. So it's not that pleasure's bad, it's where do we get that pleasure? We get it through our senses, we get entangled. But when we engage in spiritual activities, thinking of the Lord, remembering him, serving him, glorifying him, then we get pleasure from a source that's pure, and that pleasure has two qualities that are really, really important. Whenever we think we're happy, we have to ask ourselves, does this thing I'm experiencing, does it have these two qualities? It never ends, and it always increases. Whatever you call pleasure, you have to measure to those two things. If it never stops and it always gets better, that's pleasure. That's considered, what do you say, bona fide? Yes, we'll accept that as pleasure. But you can't get that from material interaction. The senses can't give you that. You'll get some pleasure and then it'll be gone. Either it'll be gone because it goes away. If you like eating mangoes, I'm fond of mangoes. The pleasure will stop because I ran out of mangoes. Or the pleasure will stop because I eat too many and I get sick. And I can't eat anymore. Either way, the pleasure doesn't go on forever. So that rules out satisfying my tongue with mangoes is real pleasure. And then the other one is, does it increase? And doesn't really increase. Mangoes are mangoes, they taste the same. They're nice tomorrow because I didn't have them for a day or two, then you taste them again, but the pleasure doesn't increase. So spiritual pleasure, when you're thinking of Krishna, when you're telling people about Krishna, when you're honoring prasad or serving prasad, all these activities, they get better and better over time. And that pleasure doesn't end, it just increases. So this is spiritual pleasure. This can't be had or cannot be obtained through the senses. It has to be obtained from our, the spiritual platform with our soul or who we are interacting with the spiritual energies. That gives this pleasure. That and you've experienced it, right? If you go to a festival or you engage in some activity, it's pleasurable when you're doing it. Serving prasad is a good example because you may be very hungry on some days like Janmashtami or certain festivals. You'll fast, and then at the end of the day, you go to serve prasad, and when you start, you're a little hungry, but by the time you finish serving, you might still be hungry, but you almost don't care because it's so much fun just feeding everyone else that it's pleasurable when you're doing it. And the next day you think about it, you say, well, that was fun. You still get pleasure after the fact, that it's like, oh, that was very nice. So this is spiritual pleasure, and this comes from fixing the mind and the senses on the personality of the Lord. Another one that is easy to help fix the mind is when you think of Lord Damodar. Krishna's pastime as a naughty child, and he gets tied up from his mother. It's just that this is what I find very profound, and it really absorbs my mind when I think about it. The fact that Krishna, Supreme Personality of Godhead, all-powerful, all-knowing, omnipotent, he gets pleasure being controlled by his devotees, right? He gets pleasure having Arjuna tell him on the chariot, go here, go there. So it's like a taxi cab driver, you know, he's being Arjuna's chariot driver, which is not a lofty, honorable position. Chariot driver, all the dirt from the hooves of the horses that hits the chariot driver doesn't hit Arjuna. But to serve Arjuna, he's happy. Yes, my devotee, I'll serve him, like a menial servant. And as Lord Damodar, his mother ties him up and chastises him. He gets pleasure because he loves his devotees so much that when they exhibit their love, he likes that. And so it's just a very deep, profound reality that Krishna likes to serve his devotees, and he likes to be controlled by them. It was described once at a retreat that in Vrindavan, so if you have a car, you have the keys to the car, and you get in the car and you can control where it goes, how fast it goes, where it goes. So you're feeling, okay, I'm safe. It might be a little dangerous to drive, but I know what I'm doing. I'm not concerned. But then you give the keys to someone else and you sit in the passenger seat and let them drive. You generally don't do that unless you trust that person. Because once you give them the keys, their foot's on the pedal, their hand's on the steering wheel, and if they go too fast or don't turn right, there's nothing you can do about it. You're surrendered. You have to just tolerate whatever they do. So you generally don't let people do that unless you know them and you trust them. Yes, okay, I trust you to drive, I'll be safe. So in Vrindavan, Krishna takes the keys to reality and gives them over to Yogamaya. He lets the desires of his devotees control the day, what happens. Because this is just his mood. He likes being controlled. And sometimes the boys may run into the mouth of a demon and he's like, no, don't do that. And he has to sort it out. He has to solve the situation. But he gives over this control. So when you think of these kinds of activities, how Krishna deals with his devotees, how much he loves them, how fond he is, how he interacts, it's very enchanting, and it occupies the mind. And so then the mind is not occupied on all these material things. So that's kind of the point of this section of these verses. Lord Kapila is giving Devahuti is how to control the mind. Yes, you can do it through pranayama, asana, and pratyahara. You can follow these eightfold practices, but it's difficult. And it's much easier just understanding who the Supreme Personality of Godhead is, what his personality is, what his nature is, what his activities are. And by thinking of those things, the mind automatically becomes controlled. And so then spiritual advancement just happens naturally, automatically, without separate effort. So it's described, and I don't know if I'll get this details right, but just like when you're eating a meal, several things happen simultaneously. Your hunger goes away, you get some nutrition, and you're restored. You don't have to independently do those things. They all happen automatically from this one act. So the one act, engaging in devotional service, automatically detachment comes, automatically knowledge comes, all these other things that are necessary, they happen automatically without separate endeavor. It's not that we have to practice bhakti yoga and then go acquire knowledge, and then go acquire detachment, and then go develop humility. We don't have to do all those things. We just do the one thing, engage in devotional service. We try to remember Krishna, we serve him, and automatically these other things happen. They're part of the process. And this is the potency. It's kind of like a hidden secret that some people deride bhakti yoga. Oh, it's so simple. It's for sentimental people. It's for emotional people who don't have a lot of intelligence. They just chant and dance because that's all they can do. And they don't understand that chanting and dancing, these devotees of Krishna, they have more knowledge in renunciation and all spiritual qualities than following these other practices. You'll often read, especially in the 10th canto, the gopis, actually, they describe themselves as very simple cowherd girls. We're unintelligent girls. We're just village girls. But when Krishna's behaving in different ways that they're not appreciating, they'll come to Krishna, why are you doing this? And they'll use all these very sophisticated arguments. They'll quote the Shastras. They'll point out, Krishna, you're violating this and that. They know the scriptures. They know philosophy better than anyone. And because of that, they understand that the goal of life, what makes us happy, is just to love Krishna. So it's not that they're lacking in spiritual qualities or knowledge or renunciation or attachment. It's just that they understand the essence of life is to love Krishna, and nothing else really matters. Whereas, the rest of us, we think other things matter. The secret of spiritual life is to one of them, the powerful one, is to understand that nothing matters. There's only one thing that matters, and that's my relationship with Krishna. If I can get that where it should be, everything else will take care of itself. My profession, there was a verse here in the beginning, a statement made, saw it twice. Text 2, it says in the translation, one should be satisfied with as much gain as he achieves by the grace of the Lord. And then in text 4, it mentions again, one should avoid thieving and be satisfied with possessing as much as he needs for his maintenance. So in the purport, this thieving is described, I think I highlighted it. In a broader sense, everyone who accumulates more than he needs is a thief. Anyone who accumulates more money or more possessions than he needs is called a thief. And one who simply accumulates wealth without spending for the sacrifice or worship of the personality Godhead is a great thief. So the idea is that when we understand that all I need is to perfect my relationship with Krishna, and then I'll be happy. Because the tendency of the mind is, well, that's fine, you can worship Krishna, but you have to get a job, you have to get a career, you have to get this, you have to have a car, you have to have all these other things. And it might be true, you might need those things. We need a place to live, you have to have sufficient food stuff. So we do have material needs. But the point is, when our relationship with Krishna is solid, all those needs will be met. Whatever we need will be provided. Krishna's providing. Prabhupada quotes this, he gives this example a lot. The birds are finding food to eat. The elephants that eat something like 50 pounds a day of whatever they eat, grass and vegetables, they're finding it, right? It's out there, it's growing. And so all these things are being provided for us. So we don't need to separately endeavor. The material consciousness, the material thinking is that I need to do these things to take care of myself. No, we're already being taken care of. We were brought into existence. Our needs will be met. We may find we don't have enough for our greed, and then we say, oh, I need more because I think I need more. But that's a whole nother topic. The mind will never be satisfied. You get a raise and you don't have a job, you need some money, so then you get a job, this is good, now I need more money. So you get a raise, you get $100,000, here, there's your salary. What the mind will tell you as soon as that happens, well, this is good, but I actually need $200,000 because really, I don't have enough. And so you get 200,000, the mind says, well, actually I need 300,000. It never ends. Whatever we do materially, that's kind of another topic, but that was interesting that phrase came up about just being satisfied with what we have from honest endeavor. Krishna will provide. But this is an important point. When we become convinced that my prime duty is to understand who I am, who God is, and what's my relationship with Him, we focus on that, everything else will take care of itself. If we get distracted trying to take care of everything else, we'll never be satisfied. It goes on and on and on. So I'll stop there and see if there's any questions or comments or corrections. Yes.
I was thinking about that point of, you mentioned how in Lord Chaitanya's time they said, oh, these devotees are just chanting and dancing. This made me think of in Lord Chaitanya's time there was what's his name? Yes, no, wait, was it Sarabhama? No, it wasn't. There was a sannyasi, right? Prakashananda Saraswati, I think, and he was an impersonalist. So he was a Mayavadi. And he just was like, yeah, this Chaitanya is sentimentalist, And he himself actually was disabled at that point, and he was like lying on his bed and just criticizing Lord Chaitanya, and oftentimes people look at devotees and they think like, oh yeah, these people, they're just sentimentalists. They just chant and they sing and dance. And people who are either doing jnana, like Prakashan Saraswati, or people just think that karma is the main thing, or they think like mystic yoga is the main thing. They think that actually devotees are just clueless. But actually, these other processes only touch on the level of the mind intelligence and so forth. The science of false ego, Kalakampa mentioned that is Krishna consciousness. So that really, Krishna consciousness chanting actually really penetrates through that false ego. That's something mystic yoga can't do. That's something jnana and karma yoga can't do. They just only touch certain levels of our existence. It's basically the body and mind and intelligence. Karma jnana just goes highest to intelligence. So false ego is where it actually takes a lot for the soul to realize that all I can do is simply chant Krishna's names and surrender to Krishna. All these mystic yogas, all the karma and jnana, it's all just gymnastics of the mind, intelligence, and the body. That's all it will give. And that's why Bhakti Yoga is the highest, because actually it gets us to that ultimate point where actually Krishna is supreme and all I can really do is sincerely chant. It actually takes a lot to come to that point. And people just think, oh, it's just chanting, dancing and singing, but actually it's the highest and that's why Prabhupada always talks about in the Gita that, this is the highest. That's where you jump up the yoga ladder and get up there first. It just made me think of all these points.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Because all these other things, there's a motive, right? They want to be purified, they want to control the mind. But if you don't deal with the false ego, when you start to get the false ego, now you're getting the core of it. Now, this is the real thing. This is what I call hardcore. Dealing with the false ego and your pride and your envy, that's real spiritual advancement. And these things, they don't mind the senses, controlling those things. Yeah, that's a really good point. They're external. They're not us. Mind, intelligence, false ego, these are all material things. But, yeah, it's powerful. It looks deceivingly simple. I remember when I first was introduced to the chanting the Maha mantras, you mentioned this before. I was reading a lot of different, very sophisticated books on spiritual life and meditation, and I thought this is just too simple. You chant this 3 words, and that's all you need to do. And it just mentally, I was like, it didn't make sense. This just seems too basic. This is ABCs. This is for kindergarten. This is child stuff. But then when I started to do it, my heart started like all these fireworks, and I was like, wow, this is really powerful. I've never experienced this before. So it's deceivingly simple. It looks like just chant and dance, but it cuts into who we are. It's a really, really good point. Well, once you start reading at the false ego, there's no going back. And you understand this process is the most powerful. Yes, Buddha.
Yeah, that's a very great point, actually, about the value, understanding the value of the holy name, of the process. And I was taking an example that I heard a while back. If we are to drop from the airplane safely, this magical box in some very far remote tribe, tribal people, they will use this in so many different ways. They'll maybe to crack a nut with it. They will maybe play by throwing this item to each other. They might use it in so many different ways. But yeah, the real thing is to power it on and be able to sustain it with charging it, where the real value will kind of shine through. It's a mundane example, but it also illustrates and it shows how much power is there in the name, but yet we are like lackadaisical about it. What's it called? A courtesy japa. Courtesy japa. Krishna is right there, but yeah, we can't value fully.
Yeah, it's a profound thing. I remember it. I used to live in Maryland, and we had some people living with us, a devotee couple, and they were arranging for a few years. They arranged these japa retreats, and so they asked us to come, and at first I wasn't attracted. I thought, well, we took a vow to chant. We know we're supposed to chant 16 rounds. I don't need to go to a retreat to teach me that I'm supposed to chant. I already know that. Like, what? I didn't get it. I didn't understand why you have a whole retreat about chanting when chanting is just what we're supposed to do. And so I didn't go to the first one they arranged, and then they kept arranging me at different places, and then they just begged us. Finally, they said, "Look, you don't have to pay. We'll arrange everything. Just come." So because they're living with us, we felt all okay, we'll come. And I think the first one we went to, Sachinanda Swami came. And it's just like it blew my mind. It gave me a whole different, like we went very deep and just like I said, wow, now I understand why people have job retreats, because part of it is intellectual and philosophical, understanding the value, but part of it's experiential and just part of it's tools, learning what to do with the mind and the body, how to facilitate it so you can chant, all these different things. And then you start to get a taste for, wow, when you actually chant with a focused mind and a focused heart, then Krishna's there and he reciprocates and experience all these things. I thought, well, now I know why you're arranging these japa retreats. And I went to several after that because they're very, very powerful. And yeah, we don't understand. Sometimes we take for granted or we don't fully understand the potency of the holy name. But when you do, you just get one little glimmer, one little drop. That's it. You're finished. It's powerful, but it's again, it's deceivingly simple. It's just, yeah, but it's a process worth our effort to try to perfect because it's so powerful. Yeah, nice example. Yeah, one more here and then we'll come
Are you familiar with the idea of spiritual bypassing?
Spiritual bypassing?
Yeah.
I haven't heard that term before.
It's kind of like I looked it up just so I could define it if I needed to. The tendency to use spiritual practices or ideas to avoid unresolved emotional issues, psychological wounds, or developmental tasks. So it's kind of like concentrating on spiritual things and not thinking about your relationships with people. So I guess my question is, in centering our relationship with Krishna with everything, how do we avoid spiritual bypassing?
Well, it's a great question, and certainly myself and other devotees have been guilty of it. It's like, well, I'm doing this, and this is for Krishna, and therefore these other things aren't so important. So there's a statement Prabhupada makes, and if we think on it, meditate on it deeply, or think about it, it helps to address that point of spiritual bypassing. A reporter once asked Prabhupada, how would you recognize, or how do we recognize your devotees if they're in the world? How do we know they're devotees? And Srila Prabhupada said, you will know them because they'll be perfect gentlemen and ladies. And you'll know they're devotees. So in order to be a perfect gentleman or lady, what does that mean? Well, it means you have to be polite and to have relationships, and all these other things, social skills. A gentleman has some social skills. Sometimes, Prabhupada go to the market to buy something, he needs to say hello to people. And devotees would say, well, how come you're just saying hello? You're not saying Hare Krishna. So, well, if I say Hare Krishna, they think I'm just some crazy old man. If I say hello, then they think I'm nice and they're friendly and can have a relationship. And then when I say Hare Krishna, maybe they'll take to it. So we have to deal with these things in terms of being in the world and being in the world but not of the world. So yeah, we still have to deal with emotions. Sometimes devotees have physical issues, you go to a doctor. You have emotional issues, you might talk to somebody that can help work that out. So it's not that we ignore these things, but we understand my prime duty is to understand who I am, who Krishna is, what's my relationship with him. And to do that effectively, that should include all facets of our life. So then if there's any individual that we look and we see, this person is this or that, well, that means our relationship with Krishna is hindered. Because Krishna loves that person. So if he loves them, how come I'm not loving? And so then we see that actually I have to take, my Guru Maharaj once told me, you should take care of your car as well as you take care of the deities on the altar. Like there shouldn't be because this is property that belongs to Krishna, so I should take care of it. I should keep the house clean. I should, we should take care of things because that's a reflection of our consciousness. All this material energy is all coming from Krishna, so we don't just waste things and waste money or neglect things. So if we go, deeply in trying to perfect our Krishna consciousness, these situations should also be reflected. And sometimes you might have to put certain effort somewhere, but yes, it is something that happens, and it's something we should try to avoid, because sooner or later, it will hinder our spiritual life. The tricky part is putting those things first and saying, okay, I have to take care of all these material things or my social skills or whatever, and therefore neglect my spiritual life. That happens sometimes. I need to work on my health, so I'm just going to work out every day, and then my sadhana suffers or something else. So there needs to be a balance. But it's not that I'll do everything in my spiritual life and neglect all these other things. Well, in spiritual life, there is no other thing. Everything is spiritual. And so everything we do should be conscious that we're trying to elevate. If that helps enough. I think you had your hand up.
It's interesting in the purport, there was a statement, and I wonder what you can comment on it. It says, as soon as one starts thinking about Krishna, the mind becomes disturbed. Why would that be?
I have to find that statement. It's in the purport to text 19?
No, not 19. We read 19, right?
Well, 19 is the purport we read. Oh, okay, I think I found it. Okay, I'll read the whole sentence. Actually, I'll read two sentences because he's comparing two things. The process of meditating on the form, the Supreme Personality Godhead within oneself, and the process of chanting the glories and the pastimes are the same. So I'm thinking of him here, or I'm thinking of him painting, or whatever. The only difference is that hearing and fixing the mind, I think I see what you're getting at. The only difference is that hearing and fixing the mind on the pastimes of the Lord. So I'm thinking of this picture in the back of Lord Chaitanya. They're doing harm. So that's a pastime of the Lord. So I'm thinking of that is easier than visualizing the form of the Lord. So the Lord's sitting in the heart. He's got 4 arms. He's there. He's described about 9 inches tall. So if I'm thinking of the Lord in the heart, it's more difficult because as soon as when I begin to think of the Lord, especially in Kali Yuga, especially in this age, the mind becomes disturbed. So it means that for how long, just try thinking, the Lord's in my heart, what does he look like? I mentioned he's wearing a girdle, it's actually just a wrap, and he wraps his dhoti. So he's dressed, he's got jewels, he's all there. We can do that for a few minutes and then the mind gets distracted. And then we forget that I'm supposed to be meditating on the Lord in the heart. Whereas if I'm meditating on the Lord in one of his pastimes, I can sustain that for much longer. There's more information for me to focus on and think about. And in here, I can't really see him. I can visualize him, but it's a little more difficult to see him. And so that's my understanding. When it says the mind becomes disturbed, it means we can't sustain that. Because the super soul, it's just hard to see him. He's there in the heart. Sometimes we can feel him or perceive him. But getting a clear image or understanding of he's there and this is what he looks like and this is what he's doing, because he's just sitting there. And the mind becomes disturbed, basically distracted by other things. Whereas when we're thinking of the Lord's activities and pastimes, it's much easier to absorb our thoughts in those things. That's my understanding from what Prabhupada's saying here when using that word disturbed. Not disturbed in a bad way, just means that's more difficult to do than thinking of Krishna's lifting Govardhan Hill. You can think of that for quite a while before the mind becomes disturbed or distracted. Does that help? Kantra Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So that, which is your person's faith.